Hi guys, and welcome back to Gardening Suburbia. My name is Amanda, and today we are processing over 30 pounds of tomatoes that I've harvested from my garden. Last night I took them out of my freezer and put them in my sink. They're in gallon-sized Ziploc baggies, that way they can defrost. Putting them in the freezer actually allows you to just easily slip the skins off of them instead of having to boil them and then remove the skins while they're hot. So I haven't tried this method before, but I saw it somewhere and decided to give it a try. Plus, I wasn't getting a huge amount of tomatoes every single day, and I figured I'd just do a bulk preservation day. So I have a recipe that I'm actually going to be using from the Ball book. It's the new Ball canning book for canning and preserving. So there's a recipe in here for oven roasted marinara, which I think is going to be a good base so that I can go ahead and build on it. When I decide to make meals, I can just take the jar out and then add whatever else I want to add to the sauce to make it a little more something. So I'm going to go ahead and get my tomatoes prepped. I'm going to go ahead and roast them in the oven. But first I need to take off the skins, take out the cores, quarter them, and place them in some Pyrex dishes so that they get nice and oven roasted. So I'm just going to go ahead and preheat my oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 190 degrees Celsius. I'm going to let that go as I'm prepping my tomatoes. So as you can see here, I have, I think it's 8 gallon bags of tomatoes. I'm just gonna go ahead and start by placing just one, working one by one through them. They are still very cold, even though I put them in about, I think it was around 11 o'clock last night. I put them in my sink. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab a trash can to put the skins in. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and remove the skins and cores of these, put them in this little basket I have here with a compostable bag, and this will just go into my compost bin, and then I'll put them in each of my Pyrex, trying to fill them up as I go, and then just pop them in the oven. Okay, so one thing I'm seeing right off the bat is I probably should have scored these on the bottom so that they would have came off a little easier, but that is okay. It's a process, learning process with everything. So I have one Pyrex dish filled with tomatoes. I'm just going to go ahead and drain off some of the excess water, and then once I get all of these filled, the Pyrex dishes, I'm going to go ahead and top these with onions, poblano peppers, and a few diced bell peppers, and some seasonings, and then I'll throw these in the oven. And now we have Pyrex number 2. And that is our third dish of tomato. So I'm just gonna go ahead and chop up this bell pepper and these 2 poblanos real fast, and then just go ahead and kind of evenly disperse this among the 4 trays that I have. I need to get these in the oven so I can go ahead and start on the next step. I also have some potatoes outside that need to be harvested today. I'm going to go ahead and put my compost down here on the ground so I can easily access it. Alright, I'm just just gonna do a nice fine chop on these. Well, more like a small cube on these. Just gonna do like to have little chunks of bell pepper in my tomato sauces. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and move on with my poblano. I think I'm actually going to only do one poblano for these 4 containers. And I'm going to go ahead and remove the seeds. So I'm just going to go ahead and then I'm just going to go ahead and roughly chop these as well. Alright, so now that this is all chopped up, I'm going to go ahead and just evenly disperse this again among my tomato batches. And then I need to prep some of my onions. So I've already peeled my onions. I'm gonna go ahead and roughly dice them and throw them in here as well. Alright, so I'm just gonna do the 2 onions. I've got a nice little even spread of onion on top of this. So I'm going to go ahead and add my oil and my herbs. So I did go ahead and pick some freshly picked herbs from the garden. So I've got basil, and I've also got some oregano here. And I'm just going to go ahead and pull some of the leaves off of the oregano and just kind of disperse it into there. And then pick up some basil, plop it in. Alright, and then I'm just going to go ahead and top with my herb infused oil. And then generously shake some salt. I've got some pink Mediterranean sea salt. And then I'm going to do some crushed black pepper. And then just for a little something extra, I have some crushed red peppers that I made last season with shishito peppers, candy cane peppers. I dehydrated them and then finely ground them. It is a tiny bit spicy, but not too crazy, so I'm just going to do a light sprinkle on all of these, just to give it a little extra something. And then these are all ready. I'm going to go ahead and pop it in my oven. It's at 375 degrees Fahrenheit, 190 degrees Celsius, for about 45 minutes until these have all browned. I'm actually going to go ahead and stir that in. And just because I do have 4 Pyrex dishes in here, I may have to let it cook just a little bit longer, just because I'm not just using one sheet, but it'll be okay. So I have my Dutch oven on and I'm getting it heated up. This is actually going to be where I simmer down my tomatoes that are currently in the oven. I'm going to add some dry red wine to this just to give it a little more flavor. And I currently have my water bath canner started. I'm going to go ahead and start sanitizing my jars. The most important part with canning, especially water bath canning, is to make sure everything is nice and clean. The cleaner that it is, the less risk that you have with potentially getting botulism or having different bacteria grow. So gonna go ahead and sanitize all of my jars, my lids, and just make sure everything's really nice and clean. I have started peeling and coring my second batch of tomatoes, and I've pre-cut all of my veggies that are going to be added into that second batch of tomatoes. So I think it's about time to go ahead and actually pull these tomatoes out and add them to this Dutch oven and start simmering it down. So it has been a little bit longer than the 45 minutes just because I did have multiple Pyrexes full of tomatoes. But that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and pop these guys out real fast and put them on my counter. Get some. So as you guys can see, my tomatoes have gotten a little brown. The onions are a little more translucent, which is perfect. I'm just going to go ahead and add these guys into this. I'm going to turn on the heat a little bit. So for this recipe, it called for 20 pounds of tomatoes. My harvest was about 30 pounds. So I'm going to go ahead and do 1.5. I'm gonna still do a cup per half batch and just really let it cook down. I'm gonna do 2/3 cup. 2/3 cup just to be safe. I'm gonna go ahead and add that in. I'm just using a fairly cheap bottle of wine. This is California Dream. It's a red blend. It honestly was probably about $7. Doesn't really need to be too fancy since I'm going to be reducing it down anyhow. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and prep some garlic cloves to be tossed in here. I'm going to mince them and then incorporate. So my sauce is simmering. I'm going to let this go ahead and simmer for another 10 minutes just so that it reduces a little bit and thickens. But before then, I'm going to go ahead and add in my minced garlic. This recipe calls for about 6 cloves. Considering this is only half of what the recipe, this is about 15 pounds worth of tomatoes, so it's not quite 6 cloves of garlic that I'm putting in. I do love garlic, but this will be perfect, and if I need to add garlic in while I make those dinners, I can. I'm just going to go ahead and stir this in. So far it looks great, smells phenomenal. It's a lot thicker than the pasta sauce that I made last year, which is already giving me so much life. I'm going to go ahead and let this continue to simmer down. In the meantime, I need to continue prepping my second batch of tomatoes to go into the oven. And I also need to get my jars in this water bath. It's already starting to boil, so I'm going to go ahead and add my jars in. I'm going to go ahead and do pint-sized jars. This recipe says I can make 8 pints. Since this is 15 pounds instead of the 20, I probably will use 5 to 6 pints, but I'll go ahead and sanitize extra just in case. So I'm just gonna go ahead and use regular pint size with the regular mouth, just because I don't need this to be a wide mouth. I'd use the wide mouth more for like pickles or for sauces, like salsas. But I'm going to go ahead and just plop these guys in here and make sure they fill up with water, just so that they are completely sanitizing. And I did add in some white vinegar into this pot here, just so that I wasn't, or that it was cleaning off the lime scale buildup that you get from using tap water here. Okay, so I currently have 5 jars. I'm going to go ahead and do 7. Just because I will need them eventually for the next batch anyways. So my first batch of tomatoes is simmering down. I just finished getting all of my second batch peeled and cored. So I'm gonna go ahead and distribute these between these 4 dishes here, and then I'm gonna add my seasonings, my olive oil, and then I'm gonna add my pepper, poblano, and onion mixture. So I have all of my trays set up. I added my onion and pepper mixture, some Mediterranean sea salt, my herb infused oil that I made, and right now I'm adding in some black pepper. The last thing I'm going to go ahead and add is my basil, and then my spicy oregano. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and mix these up real fast. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pop these in the oven. It's at 375 still, and it's still warm from the first batch that I did. I'm probably going to keep these in for about 45 to 55 minutes, or until I see them browning. So I'm going to go ahead and pop these in. And then we need to go ahead and start canning up my first batch of tomato sauce. It has reduced nicely. As you can see, it is a deep red and it's very thick. We need to take the jars that are in this canner and set them right here so that it's easier for us to go ahead and can those tomatoes. So I'm just going to carefully go ahead and get these jars out, making sure that I'm pouring out the hot water that's inside of them, and then just placing them next to my Dutch oven here. You want to make sure that you're also checking for any cracks or chips in your canning jars, just because if you do can with them full of food and they have a crack or a dent or a chip, there's a very high likelihood that they will break while you're processing your food. And it would really suck to lose all of that freshly grown produce based upon a jar being damaged. I'm going to go ahead and just dip my funnel, it is stainless steel, into this boiling water, just so that I can make sure that it's clean as well. I did wash it, but I just want to make sure that it's more sanitized than if not. So this is the one that we're going to be looking at. Currently, I am at 873 feet, so I do not need to increase any of my processing time. So whatever the book says, I'm going to follow. If you are in any of these altitude ranges, just do a quick Google search of what is my elevation, and it'll tell you your elevation in feet, and then based on that you can find your range and add whatever processing time that you need to do for the water bath method. So for this recipe, it wants us to process our jars for 40 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and process my jars for 40 minutes just because I don't need to adjust my altitude. So I have my hot jars here. I'm just going to go ahead, they're safe to the touch. I'm going to go ahead and just gingerly add these in. I need to leave about a ½ inch of head space. That is space from the top of the lid to whatever point that your food begins. So I almost forgot the most important part when it comes to water bath canning. That is adding an acid. So adding an acid to your whatever you're canning is going to ensure that you're not going to be getting botulism. Botulism is basically a bacterium that grows in whatever food that is canned, and it has an environment that is not acidic enough. Adding acid is going to kill that bacteria when you're water bath canning. In pressure canning, the pressure and the temperature of that jar gets so hot that it kills off the bacteria, and that's one plus side to using pressure canning, but I do not have a pressure canner. It is kind of expensive to buy. So all in all, it is super important to make sure you're adding an acid to whatever you're canning when you're using the water bath canner. So this is anything from citric acid to vinegar or lemon juice. Today I'm gonna go ahead and use lemon juice just because it is what I have on hand. And I kind of want to stay away from the citric acid. So I have the Santa Cruz Organic Pure Lemon Juice. The recipe calls for a half cup. Since I have about 15 pounds of tomatoes here instead of the recipe's 20, I'm gonna go just a smidge below the half cup. So this is my half cup and it's just a smidge under. So I'm just gonna go ahead and add this in and then give it a good stir. I'm glad that I realized this before I canned these. Tomatoes do have a lot of acid in them, but it's better to be safe than sorry when it comes to canning your own food, especially when it's, you know, food that you took all the time and love to grow. Okay. So, now that that is all in there, I'm going to go ahead and actually get to putting in my stuff. I went ahead and wiped all my rims again just because I had already poured, and I re-sanitized my funnel. So I'm going to make sure I leave that 1/2 inch headspace on these, just so that they process correctly. I think we have a perfect amount for 4 jars. I'm going to go ahead and remove any of the air bubbles in these guys. So I just have this little spatula thing that came with the ball canning kit. So I'm just going to go ahead and use that to make everything smush down. And then the neat thing about this guy is that he actually has the little measuring part for 1 inch of headspace, 3/4 inch, 1/2 inch, and then a 1/4 inch. So we need a 1/2 inch. And I'd say that we are pretty much there. So we're gonna go ahead and pop some fresh lids on these guys, and after we wipe this, I'm gonna get a wet, damp paper towel and make sure the rims are clean, just so that we get a really good seal on these. So we have some regular mouth lids. You're gonna go ahead and just center these nicely. And then, or fingertip tight turn on these bands. Okay, and now I'm just gonna go ahead and drop these in my water bath canner for about 40 minutes. So with these, you want to make sure that the water is just above your jars. You want them to be fully submerged to make sure that you're getting a good canning process done. I'm going to go ahead and pop my lid on that and let it process for that full time, and I'm going to make sure that I set a timer. So 40 minutes on the clock. We still have to go ahead and process the tomatoes that are in the oven right now, but we are so much closer to having our first batch of 2022 summer pasta sauce. Okay guys, so I have my second batch of tomatoes out. They're nice and browned. I'm gonna go ahead and toss these into my Dutch oven and simmer them down with my red wine and my garlic that's been minced, and make sure for sure to add my lemon juice, just so that I have something acidic in there that is going to for sure kill off any bacteria that is in my canning jars for the long haul preservation. My first batch has just finished. I processed them for 40 minutes and then I took the lid off, turned off the burner, and just let them sit for about 5 minutes to finish processing. I'm going to go ahead and actually pull these out now and place them on this towel over here so that they can go ahead and rest for the rest of the night until the morning. I'll go ahead and remove the bands in the morning and then go ahead and do a little check to make sure that the lids are sealed, and then we'll be good. So I'm gonna go ahead and use my tongs to take out these jars. They're already looking good. Look very sealed, just even from looking at them. Now I'm just going to go ahead and fill my Dutch oven with the second batch of tomatoes. I'm not going to go ahead and blend these or use an immersion blender. I actually do not have an immersion blender. I'm just going to go ahead and try to find any of the larger pieces of tomato in here and just kind of hand chop them. I kind of like my tomato sauce to be a little chunky, but if you like it to be a little smoother, you can always bake just the tomatoes and seasoning and oil in your oven, and then once it is finished, go ahead and either use an immersion blender or a regular blender and get a nice smooth puree. And then once you put it into your big stock pot, you can go ahead and add in like bell peppers or onions or whatever if you want it to have those kind of bigger chunks in your sauce. If you don't want the bigger chunks, you can go ahead and just do it the way I did it and then blend it up. But let me go ahead and add in my wine and garlic. I just kind of tossed them into the same little thing just so it was easier to pour the garlic in. I'm gonna go ahead and mix that in and turn up my heat just till it gets to a boil, and then I'll reduce it to a simmer. And I'm going to do another, not quite a full half cup, but more like a smidge less than a half cup of lemon juice. And go ahead and mix that in as well. So I'm gonna let this get to a boil, and then I'll reduce it to a simmer for about 20 minutes, and then we should be ready to get going on canning our second batch of pasta sauce. Alright, so I have my second batch of cans that are needing to be coming out, so that, well, second batch of cans that have been sterilized that need to come out. So I went ahead and sterilized my funnel again. Got a couple new jars just in case I need to fill more. I only had 3 left from the first batch that were sterilized. So I went ahead and sterilized 3 more just in case. Go ahead and turn off my second batch of tomato paste, or tomato sauce. So I think I'm going to get about 5 jars of this second batch of tomato sauce, which is awesome. Maybe even a little extra. We will see. Alright, so we actually ended up getting 6 jars on the second one. Some of them not quite as full as the others, but that is perfectly okay. I'm going to go ahead and now remove any air bubbles. And I might spoon some out of that one, just because it is a little bit fuller. Alright, and the last step is to go ahead and clean all the rims just to make sure that we get a good seal. I'm going to use a fresh paper towel for this. And I've got my water bath canner all nice and boiling so that we can immediately pop these in and process them for 40 minutes like we did for the first batch. And then we've got some more fresh lids. Just going to go ahead and place those on there, centered. Okay. And then just fingertip tight with the bands. Alright, and so now we just need to pop these in our water bath canner. So I'm just going to drop these in one by one. And again, you want to make sure that they're covering the jars completely and they're fully submerged. I'm going to go ahead and pop a lid on this and then set a timer for 40 minutes and then we'll be all finished. So, last night I took out my tomatoes around 10 or 11 o'clock at night and put them in my sink to defrost. And then I woke up this morning around, 7, and I went to the grocery store, picked up a few things that I needed for today, and I didn't really start processing my tomatoes until about 11 o'clock this morning. It is now almost 7 o'clock at night. I realized this is my second time actually doing a big processing day for tomatoes, so I'm sure it'll be streamlined a little bit as I learn and progress. But when you first start out, it's going to be hard. It's a lot of work and it can get really tiring. Like, my feet are sore, I'm hot, my kitchen is very steamy, but it's so worth it to have homegrown food that I have preserved on my own, that I know is safe, that I know is organic, that doesn't have pesticides or herbicides on them, for that to be meals for me and my boyfriend for the winter. Things that are gonna make delicious spaghettis, tortellini, lasagna, chili. Like, there's so many possibilities with this tomato sauce. So don't be discouraged. Keep on trucking. It'll get easier with time, as I'm sure next season it will be even easier for me. So far with the process of putting the tomatoes in the freezer, I did really like it. It was really cold, so I probably could have taken them out of the freezer even earlier than I did, so they had a longer time to thaw out, which is like the complete flip side of when you boil your tomatoes to get the skins off. Your hands usually are burning. My hands are freezing this time. So for next year, if I'm going to do the freezer method again, I'm going to make sure that I score the bottoms of the tomatoes so that the skins come off even easier. Other than that, I did really like it. It did seem to go a lot faster than boiling them did. It did take up a lot of my freezer space though. I only have just the regular top freezer, about yay big. So there was that. I did only harvest about 30 pounds of tomatoes this year, which was a little disappointing because half of my determinate bed of tomatoes really didn't do well. Next season I'm going to be flipping some things around, but I'm glad to have food that I'm putting away. Last year I think I did 7 cans of tomato sauce. I think this year I'm going to have 10, but it's still more than I had last season. Also, another tip that I really enjoyed was putting vinegar in my water bath canner. I noticed that there was a lot of lime scale buildup in there. Putting the vinegar really made it so there was none. Previously, I had to wipe all of my jars clean of the like milky soot that was on the outside of the jars. But so far, they look pristine. So these are the first batch. I haven't wiped these at all. They look like they just came out from me sanitizing them. Previously they were covered in a film. So I'm super excited about that. All of the jars look like they have sealed. I'm gonna wait a little bit longer to do my little test where you hold it up without the band just to make sure that I got a really good seal. But that's just one more tip. If you guys are using a water bath canner, if you add just a smidge of vinegar to your water bath canner, your canner is gonna be cleaner. Your jars are going to be cleaner, and I'm excited that you guys are coming along with me on this journey, and I hope that your processing season is going well. Happy gardening, guys, and I'll see you next time.